lips, words, tongue are used 150 times at least. Interesting that God knows how to speak. When he created Adam and Eve, he said to them, now I want you to take care of this garden and do not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. He spoke to them. I mean, that sounds so elementary and simple, but God can speak. Adam and Eve understood them. God said to man, he said, now, it's not good that you're alone. I'm going to make a helpmate for you. He used words. God speaks. Adam and Eve, here they are created. They meet each other for the first time. They don't have to go to ESL class. And he says, wow, you know, and they start conversing with each other immediately. Words are powerful. Words are vehicles that God has given us to communicate through and with. The text that I chose to use as a launching point from the book of Proverbs is found in Proverbs 18:24. The tongue has the power of life and death. Those who love it will eat its fruit. I like the way the Message puts it. Words can kill, words can give life. They can either be fruit or poison. It's your choice. Now maybe some of you are watching together with the rest of North America the Timothy McVeigh trial in Denver. This young man who had this grudge and this acid eating in his soul that he allegedly bombed the big building there in Oklahoma City. And they finally found a jury, had that whole trial take place, not as long as the O.J. Simpson trial, but they finally finished it, and the verdict came back, and they said, guilty, okay? Then the judge gave them one more order. He said, go back, sequester yourself, and come with a verdict as to should the person be lifetime in jail or death. They came back, and the verdict was unanimous. They said he deserves the sentence of death. Did you notice that later on television they had all the jurors lined up and they had an interview with them? What did it feel like? A question was asked when you actually made a decision that someone was deserving of death. And they talked about the tremendous emotion and the hour when they finally made that decision. There were tears and there was just a lot of pain because even though he was guilty, the power of words, they could come in that courtroom and say guilty and death in the electric chair. And then I read this scripture here and it strikes me. Words can kill, words can give life. Words are either poison or fruit. And what I hear the scripture saying is that every time I release words from my life, I either make something come alive or deaden it. I can put someone down or lift someone up. I can kill an idea or make an idea come alive. I can help a group disband and be destroyed, or I can be used to help make a group go. I can be a person who destroys my family, or I can be a person who builds my family. Words have an awful lot of power. So I began to search for scriptures that talked about the gift of God, that we have a powerful gift of speech. Speech is a powerful gift from God. And I noticed there are at least 3 segments that tend to talk to us about the gifting of speech. One is that words can be healing, almost like a medicine. Words can be revealing. They expose things about ourselves we didn't realize was in us. And they can be appealing. Let's talk a bit about words can be healing. And I discovered in chapter 15, verse 11 of Proverbs, a gentle answer turns away wrath, but a harsh word stirs up wrath. A soft answer. It's interesting that George Swinnock wrote these words. Soft words and hard arguments do well together. Passion will heat the sinner's blood, but compassion will heal his conscience. Maybe you heard about the woman who went on vacation with her friend. Husband stayed home. And finally she landed in New York and called back to her husband and said, how are things at home? And he said, well, honey, I hate to tell you this, but your dog died. She went into shock, absolute shock, and said, now you know, dear, that we have this relationship and you really should be kinder and gentler and break the news softer. And he said, how should I have done it? Well, you could have done it this way. When I got to New York, you could have said, the dog is on the roof. And then when I got to London and I called back, you could have said he fell off the roof. And when I got to Paris, you could have said, Well, he's at the vet's. And then when I got to Rome, you could have said, poor dog died. And then she said, by the way, how's Mom doing? He said, she's on the roof. And, you know, so what happens is this whole matter of learning how to speak softly is not that easily. The word speaking softly means modestly and graciously. Did you know each time you speak that way, and somehow the Holy Spirit moves into your word vocabulary and sentence structure, it's like a good medicine. It can cure a headache. It can cure pain. It can bring health to relationships. Words are like a good medicine used appropriately. Words are revealing. I discovered, for example, chapter 15, verse 2. The tongue of the wise commands knowledge, but the mouth of the fool gushes evil. If you take a cassette, take the label off of it, slip it into your cassette player, and turn it on, and you don't know what in the world is on that thing. You could have rock and roll music, you could have Western music, you could have Northview music, you could have a speech, you could have anything, but when you stick it on, you just have no idea until you turn that thing on, and it's something from 1930. Amazing. In the same way, when you and I put our heart into gear, or our heart is in that cassette player, and someone turns on the mouth simply reveals what's in the heart. How you speak and what you say and how you say it doesn't reveal your mouth, it reveals your heart. And I think that's significant to realize. It's very revealing. There are times we say something, we say, oh, I didn't mean to say that. I really, 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 really didn't mean to say that. Often when we say that, we revealed more than we wish to reveal. And maybe that's more true about us than when we mask and try to play things differently. Wasn't that a stunning thing during the Watergate trial when suddenly all those tapes of Richard Nixon were released? And he was a good friend of Billy Graham, played a lot of golf with him, prayed with him, and did all the rest. And suddenly the secret life of Nixon was revealed, and he had such a crude and ungodly vocabulary. It was unreal. And everybody was just shocked that a president in his office would use that kind of language. And I guess I'm often surprised that what's in my heart, and you might be surprised what's in your heart, it's very revealing. The next thing is, it's also a very appealing thing, language. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. A very appealing thing. In that day, one of the most treasured and cherished gifts that you could give was going to an artisan who took gold and made wonderful caricatures of apples, filigreed with silver and framed, and that was the gift of all gifts that you could give. And so the idea is something beautiful and pristine and wonderful was this kind of an apple setting, filigreed with silver. So what we talk about is when a word is well spoken, someone has done just a wonderful job and no one's noticed it, someone comes by and says, I want you to know, that was good. That was very good. And you know it's like gold and silver, and it's, aha, that's right. Or someone has just received an award, and they want so much to share, and everybody's so much into themselves they don't even notice it. But someone comes by and says, I want to congratulate you. You really deserve that. It's a compliment, and a compliment always completes an emotion to a time of celebration. I was coming back yesterday from Kelowna. I had spoken at a retreat, and I usually leave my car at a Econo lot. So I got on the shuttle, and I began going to a Econo lot. And I've never met a gentleman like the driver of that shuttle bus. He was probably about 65, 70 years old. And he immediately noticed right in the front seat is this girl about 5 years old. And he begins spinning tales to her and telling her all the jokes he knew that were children's jokes. He was really a wonderful older man. And he said to her little girl, he said, how can you turn an uncle into an aunt? She says, I don't know. He says, what you do is have your uncle stand on the sidewalk and go high up in the sky with the airplane, look down, and he looks like an ant. You know, that was pretty good. I think I'll use that Sunday. And he said, little girl, he said, let me ask you another question. What happens when you educate a jelly bean? She said, I don't know. And he said, they become a smarty. You know, and it was... And so I said, little girl, I said, have you heard the roof joke? And she said, no. I said, you couldn't understand it. It'd be above your head. And so, we had this whole thing going in the bus. And, by the time, we just had a party by the time we came to unload our suitcases. And then I took him aside and I said, sir, I really enjoyed this short bus ride. It's amazing what you could do and what you did. I said, he says, it doesn't take a nuclear scientist to drive this shuttle bus. So I've decided to entertain all the children I can whenever I can. And last night I told this story, and a gentleman by the name of Tom came up on the stage and said, I was in that same bus at a different time in the afternoon. He told all the same jokes. He hadn't added my joke, though, to it. That really bothered me, Just not making the grade anymore, But isn't it amazing how you can turn an ordinary shuttle bus ride from point A to point B into a wonderful experience by someone who simply used their tongue to make a little girl cheerful? And it occurs to me that that's one of the things that God has blessed us with, a tongue. We can notice and speak, and from the overflow of the heart, say things that make a big difference and that are phenomenally appealing. Michael Horner from our church is a debater on apologetics on university campuses around the world. And several weeks ago, I met a woman near the back after a service, and she was from Ukraine. She spoke English brokenly, but quite well. And I asked her how she came here. Well, she had just finished Bible college. I said, well, where'd you come from? Ukraine. I said, were you a Christian there? No, she said, I was an atheist. I said, how did you become a Christian? She said, Michael Horner was there in the Ukraine giving a lecture. And the first night when he gave his lecture, he spoke in English, and I understood not one single solitary word of English. But I took one look at him, and the glow on his face, and his manner of speaking, and I said, whatever that man has, I want. Isn't that amazing? Couldn't understand the words, but picked up the spirit. The next day he had a translator. She said, within a few days I understood the gospel as a communist, and I accepted Jesus. And I came to Canada, and I have a Bible college degree, and I want to make my life one that counts for him. You have no idea how you can turn a situation around with the power of a tongue. And the tongue, of course, reveals the heart. But there's also power that has, there's a speech that has destructive power for evil. And as I looked at all those verses and categorized them, I recognized one. Specifically, verse 25, verse 18, it says, like a club or sword or sharp arrow is the man who gives false testimony against his neighbor. Those are strong words. A club, whack. A sword, ouch. An arrow, pierces. And we have words that we can do that to our spouse with, and we know how to aim, how to pull back and do that, and it's almost impossible to take it back. Words have tremendous destructive power. Someone says to a student, you're not smart enough to finish high school, you'll never make anything out of yourself. It hits like a club, and suddenly that student no longer has desire to study. A parent says, you will never amount to a hill of beans, and that comes into a person's heart, and it's destructive. Or someone runs out of the door, slams the door, and says, I'll never talk to you again, and then adds expletives. It is almost impossible to ever draw that poison out except by the grace and the mercy and the help of God. And there are people who are wounded all over the world and in this church because words have had a nuclear power effect in their lives. Let's look at a couple of ways in which it can be negative. I noticed at least 4. Words can be destructive by lying, by gossiping, by anger, and by talking too much. In my mind, as I read these texts, I thought of a Swiss Army knife. You know, one of those things that you pull out the corkscrew and the fingernail file and the screwdriver and the fish scaler and the whale scaler, you know, all that stuff that's in the end of a Swiss Army knife. And I was thinking, you know, my tongue, all these things can come out and they can do all these things. You know, my tongue has amazing power. First of all, it can lie. Chapter 19, verse 5. Would you turn there with me and notice what it says? A false witness will not go unpunished, and he who pours out lies will not go free. I found a line about lying this week which really kind of spoke to me. And I think it's the next one. The first and the worst of all frauds is to cheat oneself. All sin is easy after that. In other words, what happens is when you and I lie in our heart, then all other sins are available to us. Satan is the father of lies. He doesn't want us to speak truth, tell the truth to ourselves, because he knows truth sets us free. So someone pads their expense account. Are they hurting the company or are they hurting themselves? You're hurting yourselves. You're not cheating the company. You're cheating yourself. Someone cheats on an examination, be it a driver's license examination or a university or a high school examination. We plain flat out cheat. Are we hurting the organization or ourselves? There's something that shrivels and dies and cuts. We cheat ourselves. Someone has an illicit relationship. Are they hurting others? Yes, they are, but they're hurting themselves, and they open themselves up to a plethora of lies and things they have to do to cover up. Reminds me of the guy who sent Revenue Canada $150 and said, I just haven't been able to sleep. I cheated on my income tax. And if I can't sleep anymore, I'll send you the rest of the money, you know? There's something about a basic honesty that we need to learn within ourselves in terms of who we are and what God is doing. Lying is one of those. And then by gossiping. Turn to chapter 11, verse 13. A gossip betrays a confidence, but a trustworthy man keeps a secret. Information is power. If you know something others don't know, you have a unique amount of power that you can use to help or destroy. And when we have information that we know is confidential, we sense this power, and some of us, we just cannot help ourselves. We have to leak it to let people know, I have stuff in my mind that you don't have. I was reading a book on gossip this week, and I found at least 4 things that we need to look for ground rules. Number 1, whatever you're told in confidence, do not repeat. Unless in their telling you, say, hold it. If you're going to give me the rest of this information, I want to have the privilege of sharing that information with people who can help us in this setting. Otherwise, stop talking right now. And there are times we shouldn't keep things to ourselves. They need to be handed on. And much damage has been done. But if it's told to us in confidence, we shouldn't repeat it unless asking that individual. Whenever you're tempted to talk, do not yield. Whenever you're discussing people, do not gossip. That is slander. Put people down or say information that isn't true. I should sometimes let you know some of the stuff I hear about myself. It's just really amazing. I have resigned. Someone told me recently that I had just received a gift from the church for $750,000, and they had heard it on a golf course in Salmon Arm. That was true, that Northview had bought. I don't know where the house is. I don't know where. I have a loan on my house, but it was rather an interesting story. It came as gospel to me. You know, there's somewhere the gossip got around the golf course about something, unless they have things they haven't told me yet. However, when you're prone to disagree, do not slander. That is, don't feel the need to damage and hurt people. Using our tongue wisely is a gift from God, and using it in such a way that will build us up and build others up is significant. Don't gossip. Also by anger. I was really stunned when I found this verse. Look with me at the verse on anger, chapter 29. It's rather remarkable how strong Proverbs speaks about anger. Verse 22, an angry man stirs up dissension. In other words, if you've got a lot of dissension in your family, if you have dissension at your work, if you have dissension in the church, it shows there's some angry people around. Anger basically is an emotional reaction to frustrated goals. I want my way, and I want it now, and nobody better stand in my way, and I'll jolly well blow off a lot of steam if you won't let me have my way. It's a tantrum. By anger. In other words, an angry man stirs up dissension, and a hot-tempered one commits many sins. Now watch this. If you are a person given to anger, you can be assured of one thing. You'll multiply your sin. You'll find yourself saying things you didn't mean to say. You'll find yourself hurting people you didn't mean to hurt. You'll find yourself destroying situations that have been delicately set up. An angry person commits many sins because somehow it blocks out and drugs our rational mind, and the emotion takes over, and we just make mayhem around us. It occurs to me that you and I need to learn something about anger management. And I think that one of the ways we need to do that is by talking honestly to one another. Maybe some of you need to go to an anger management seminar or support group, because I feel for people who have that struggle. It's a painful one, and we need God's grace to overcome it. And then by talking too much or talking instead of working. Look at chapter 14, verse 23. It says, all hard work brings a profit, but mere talk leads only to poverty. In other words, when we exercise our vocal cords rather than our muscles, when we are always talking instead of working, we find ourselves losing jobs, being laid off, and being the first always to go and look for another job. One of the things that's almost impossible to abide by a worker is when someone talks too much and simply doesn't get their work done. So what happens is the Bible tells us that we ought to work, and we shouldn't do this destructive thing of always talking. Lying, gossiping, anger, and talking. Those are the pieces there at the end of that Swiss Army knife that are dangerous. Then speech has great power for good. I don't know if doctors still do this, but I can't recall the last time a doctor did this for me, but when I went in for a checkup, said, stick out your tongue. And somehow doctors have an amazing ability to look at what the tongue looks like and what's on the tongue and the color of the tongue and the breath of the tongue and all the rest of that, and tells you whether you're well or not. Speech has great power for good, and when we stick out our tongue, here are some good things that the doctor can say can come our way. First of all, it can bring peace to the warring. Look at chapter 15, verse 18, and it gives us an insight on that. Chapter 15, verse 18. A hot-tempered man stirs up dissension, but a patient man calms a quarrel. Patience is a term that means to stay under the load and take something completely from point A to point B. Patience. Patience is a gift that comes with God being in us and giving us a vision of what it looks like on the long haul. Patience brings peace. You would be amazed at how much peace you can bring into warring situations simply by being patient or being gentle. I remember one of my sons said to me at one occasion when his volume was raising, it was one of my better days, and mine, I didn't know exactly how to handle it, and I just kept on going quieter and quieter in my conversation while he was going louder and louder. And all of a sudden, in utter frustration, he says, Dad, don't play psychologist with me. You know. And then I said, okay. If you match angry word for angry word, it just turns up the volume. Why not speak gentle? Sometimes gentleness does a lot more than loudness. In other words, God is into making peace. A friend of mine that I knew of ran off with another person's wife. And then this friend of mine went to try and talk to the individual. And when he got there, he opened the door after it was answered and came in and looked at this man and this woman living together, and both of them having partners and families elsewhere. And he sat down. He didn't know what to say. He just didn't know what to say. Finally, he put his face in his hands and just wept and wept and wept. He still didn't know what to say. He dried his eyes with his hanky and left. That's all he did. It was such a powerful and eloquent, quiet visit that those two realized how wrong and how blind and how stupid they had been. And the next day they came for help. And they went back to their families and made things right with those whom they had left. Patience, not hurrying, bringing peace into situations. Here comes trouble, or here comes peace. Here comes dissension, or here comes delight. When people think about you, what do they look at? What do they think of in terms of how you react to those kind of situations? By restoring a sinner to wholeness. Chapter 25, verse 12. The wholeness is something that, chapter 25, verse 12, it's an amazing wholeness which comes. It's something that God says this way: like an earring of gold or an instrument of fine gold is a wise man's rebuke to a listening ear. In other words, when you and I give a rebuke which makes sense, it's like a fine piece of jewelry. I've discovered in my own experience with individuals, when someone has done something which I want to talk to them about and bring them back to wholeness, very seldom do I find myself giving you message. Do you know what you did? Do you know what they're saying about you? Do you know what the conversation at the water fountain is about you? How about rather saying, listen, I really care for you. Could you tell me what's going on in your life? Sure, it would be nice to hear about it. First of all, it gives them the chance to confess, and I don't confess for them. And at least 50% of the time, I find the story is altogether different than I heard it, and that I'm not throwing anger or judgment on individuals. And confession is good for the soul. It brings healing. And at that point, they also have a chance to, for the first time, to say, I really was wrong. And most people who are wrong are looking for a venue in which to talk it through. And there's an amazing amount of peace we can bring in that kind of a situation to restore a sinner. He who restores a sinner covers a multitude of sins. And then by informing the ignorant. Chapter 8, verse 6 and 8. Interesting verses. Chapter 8, it says, listen, for I have worthy things to say. I open my lips to speak what is right. My mouth speaks what is true, and my lips detest wickedness. All the words of my mouth are just. Isn't it amazing that you all have, and I have, information that others don't have? Someone comes to the job the first day, they are lost, they don't know which way to go, they're nervous, you can just see they're nervous. You as an employee there for a long time come and shake their hand and say, listen, let me just take a few minutes to you and explain how this place works. Let me just give you a few details, and I'll be with you these first few days as you start. And you're informing someone who doesn't have information. And they'll bless you they'll never forget you. Someone steps in a Northview church for the first time, and you meet them at the door, and you know they're lost, and you say, hey, here's the information table. Let me give you some information. Here's the Discovery Land, and do you want to sit with me? And I have people telling me regularly, I came here the first time, and someone just gave me some information. I just felt so welcome. You have information. Parents have information that children need. Children have information that parents need. We have the ability with our tongue to give information that builds up individuals and helps them to live appropriately and better. By encouraging the burdened, chapter 12 and verse 26. It's a verse we read several weeks ago, but I want to mention it again. An anxious heart weighs a man down, but a kind word cheers him up. Really, the word encourage means to give someone a stout heart. There's no one in this room, absolutely no one, who doesn't need encouragement every single day. There's not one day that I don't need encouragement. That's the way you and I are made. And so when we have a prayer altar or we meet someone, we can actually say a word that will encourage them deeply. There was a guy last night in service. He came from Boston, and I met him about 4 years ago at a conference in Chicago. And he came for 2 services last night just to see what's happening at Northview. And later he met me after both services, put his arm around me, and said things to me that made me feel valuable, really valuable. And I said, Warren Bird, you're a good man. I can hardly wait to see you again. You can be that kind of a person to someone who says, there's something about you that I recognized as special. And if we take our eyes off ourselves, we can help people to be unburdened and encourage them in a way that will last, in a way that will make a difference. Jesus put it this way in Luke chapter 6, verse 45 in the Message. It's who you are, not what you say and do, that counts. Your being brims over into true words and deeds. Now, here's the most important thing I want to say this morning. Follow me, please. What happens in our mouth is a revelation of what's in our heart. If we gossip and we lie and we cheat and we are angry and we are hurting people, it's not a mouth problem. It's a heart problem. And I find that I need to almost visually, when I have my devotional time, take my heart and lay it before God and say, God, by your blood which you spilled for me, would you cleanse my heart and make it pure so that my words have a chance to be pure? Would you reshape my heart in the image of Jesus so I can be kind and gentle and Jesus-like the way I talk? Lord, could you freshen up my heart so that the words that I speak are fresh and new and have an edge to them and they're thoughtful? Lord, could you give my heart depth so that my words have depth? And I find myself, most of my life, I'm going to try harder. I'm not going to do that again. I'm going to quit that. I'm going to grind myself up by my legalistic straps, and I'm going to march with a goose step after whatever legalism is new today. It has not worked. It will not work. It won't work in your life. Spread out your heart before God. And when God gives a new heart, it's a new cassette. And then suddenly our mouth speaks like God speaks. Our words are soft like God's words. Our atmosphere we bring into a room is a breath of heaven. Can you just feature it? A church whose heart is refreshed every week when we worship, in our home, wherever we go. And we can bring such freshness into the community that will give hope to families, hope to individuals who are downtrodden, hope to the poor, hope to those who need so much that God has given us. There's a song I want you to hear in closing. It's a good song. It'll help you to focus in on what we've said.